All right. So yeah, I think so future of search. Maybe we can start with you giving a quick introduction of Vue.com and all the ways it's innovating in search.
That sounds great. Yeah, let's do it. So U.com is a new search engine based on three major ideas. One is privacy, another one is control and agency, and the third one is summarization. And so we think that as people more and more realize the issues of, oh man, I clicked on this one thing once and now it's following me around the internet everywhere I go, or I made one search here, or I searched one news article or something, people realize they want to not have their privacy invaded as much. However, oftentimes it feels like there's a trade-off between privacy and convenience. And while 90% of people say they care about privacy, very few would be willing to give up convenience. So we're trying to make the switch very easy. We have the most privacy of any search engine in our private mode. And with one click, you can go to the personalized mode and have all the convenience that you would want. And even that convenience has better privacy and raise the bar. We're never going to force targeted ads on you. We're not going to follow you around the internet, and so on. So that's the first privacy bucket. The second one is agency and having control. A lot of people find these life hacks, quote unquote, you can read about of like, oh, I just add site Colin Reddit to my Google search and or site Colin Stack Overflow, and my search results get better. You can on U.com select your preferences once in your global preferences menu, and then you have control over the AI. And I think that is sort of a part of what we also just heard Peter talk about, which is the idea that AI right now is mostly trying to suck you into engagement loops and has certain objective functions of trying to maximize engagement, maximizing clicks, and users don't have any control over their information diet. And I think it's kind of crazy to think that the entire economy is moving online, and then we have the single gatekeeper in the beginning of most people's internet journey that mostly wants to sell your query to the highest bidding advertiser, and you have no control over what that one somewhat monopolistic monolith tells you what to read and consume and buy and see. And so we think it's very important to give that agency back to people and allow them to actually decide what the sources are that they would want to see, and then expose them to other ones too that might be below their personal preferences. And then the third thing is summarization, which is right now, I think the internet has fundamentally changed. In 20 years ago, access to information was a big issue. Nowadays, we actually have too much information and we need AI to help us summarize it and make sense of it all. And so we have a new interface that's basically two-dimensional that allows you to quickly zoom in to one type of source. You want to see more Reddit results or Quora or Coursera or Khan Academy and learn deeply about a topic, or you want to skip to another kind of source. So those are kind of the three things that motivated us, among many others, to work on U.com.
Got it. So privacy, like a user can choose how private they want their searches to be. Agency, where users can set preferences, and summarization, where we try to summarize and make sense of the web. So I think it's really interesting that U.com is adding all these innovations to search, which some people might have thought like, oh, that was just solved by Google. And actually, I wanted to ask, since I guess the theme of this is future of search, but maybe we can talk briefly about the past, or the timeline of search. So I guess obviously Google has been a main player for like 20 years. Has it been innovating much, or yeah, what do you think the landscape has looked like?
Yeah, so I think obviously Google, the company, and Alphabet have done a lot of interesting innovations, but when it comes to actual search, I think the world and Google has been stuck in a local optimum because they make so much money with ads that it's really tough for them to change their approach in any kind of way, right? You can realize maybe it doesn't make sense to have a one-dimensional list of features. So they start adding things into that one-dimensional list, but it's still a one-dimensional list from top to bottom. And it's getting more and more cluttered with some different applications inside, but that hasn't really fundamentally changed. Also, people are not able to benefit financially from sort of the data that they give, and it's another way how many Web 2 companies are kind of stuck and are going to have a hard time adjusting to Web 3, where you kind of use ideas that people that benefit and help a platform also get benefit themselves. And so I think there actually has been surprisingly little innovation in search. Most every other search engine out there looks and feels mostly like Google, but then has some issues that Google doesn't have. And so I think we have to fundamentally rethink both the design, the UI UX, as well as the underlying ideas for monetization, for information and presentation, and the AI algorithms and the control that users have, and all of that over what's currently being out there. And there are some other things that will be hard, I think, for Google to change, right? I've heard some crazy stories of companies that had lots of good organic traffic based on search queries, and then the Google Ads team comes and they're like, "Hey, do you want to buy our ads?" And we're like, "No, we're good. We're getting enough traffic from our just good content and the generally organic sort of list of blue links." And then they just disappeared. They disappeared from the rankings. They went to either page 5 or just got fully blacklisted. And they're like, fine, we'll buy the ads. Please, like, let us have a business. And then they magically come back in the rankings after buying their ads. These kinds of crazy moves that a monopoly can pull on you when your entire company depends on their traffic are just things that I think we need to work on as the entire economy moves online.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Great point. It's great to see more players in the game of search. I had one follow-up. So one of your main points was that there hasn't been so much innovation, but I was also thinking, like, well, on the other hand, like the search seems to me to be tied to progress in natural language processing. So do you agree that we are making some progress as the NLP algorithms evolve?
Yeah, I actually love NLP. I've worked on it for over a decade, and one of the many reasons why I started Vue.com is just thinking about what would be the highest impact application I could be working on in NLP, and I do think it's search. And I think only because of all these innovations over the last decade is it possible for us as a tiny startup to even build a new search engine with its own ranker, its own intent understanding, its own semantic parsing to translate, oh, I want to have directions from SF to LA, and or maybe, the castle near Death Valley National Park. And then you're like extracting all of that and putting it into the right APIs is incredibly hard. But thanks to unsupervised learning and transfer learning, we have been able to build that in a super short amount of time with very few people. And so NLP has done a lot. Translation technology and again, deep learning will help us internationalize much more quickly than it would have been possible in the past, and so on. So I think a lot of technology, a lot of sort of work in search that would have taken and had taken previous teams years to implement, we'll be able to do in a few weeks or months, and that wouldn't have been possible before.
Got it. So it's becoming much easier to build on top of these, or much easier to do all these exciting applications, given how good the natural language processing models are getting.
That's right. And unsupervised learning, especially in sort of pre-training large neural network models by just trying to predict the next word, which is such a hard problem that is almost fully AI complete if you try to do it perfectly, that it forces the model to learn really good representations of natural language. And in fact, you can use the same models to learn representations of the language of proteins, and they also learn really good representations on top of which you can then train AI models.
Oh, really? So you said proteins. So is protein sequencing like very similar to how we do NLP? I didn't know that, but that's quite
Yeah, so
interesting.
there's a paper that I published just before I left Salesforce, and still advising the project, called ProGen, protein generation. And we trained the largest protein sequence model that, instead of trying to predict the next natural language word in English or other languages, you try to predict the next amino acid. And then we actually sampled from this AI model and worked with wet lab experiments and actually generated for the first time these brand new proteins that are different to anything else we see on in nature and on Earth. And surprisingly, those new proteins were functional. They didn't just disintegrate, and that was one. But then they're even more antibacterial than the natural. We started with antibacterial, so-called lysozymes, and yeah, it's incredible. I'm kind of surprised that this work hasn't. I mean, I've already seen some companies form around it, so clearly some experts have taken note, but I'm surprised it hasn't gotten even more attention than it has. I guess the marketing, AI marketing machinery can quite compete with or compared to some others that you see out there.
Oh, that's quite interesting. Yeah, I wouldn't have expected that application. That actually is a good segue. I want to sprinkle in some more broad questions on AI in this session, because I know you've done a lot of NLP, but also a lot in other areas. And I wanted to ask what you think of natural language understanding as a proxy for artificial general intelligence. Sort of also adding to the previous session with Peter and Milan.
Yeah, so I think that natural language processing is and sort of language understanding in humans is the most interesting manifestation of human intelligence, and I think could be argued to be the one type of intelligence that sets us apart the most from animals. Animals have some basic languages, but certainly not the complexity of written and spoken language that humans have, that enable culture, that enable us humans to not have to relearn all the different skills from scratch every time. And it's amazing how, despite that, we sometimes lose technology. I'm still kind of mesmerized by this Antikythera mechanism that was found in 1902. It's like basically an analog computer from 2,100 years ago in the Greek ancient times, where they could predict various celestial bodies and predict when the next Olympic Games would happen and things like that. And it was like an analog computer. And then it got lost. And then for hundreds of years, almost thousands of years, like people didn't have that technology anymore. So, but anyway, side note aside, I think NLP basically connects all the other kinds of intelligence, right? You can have thought about and thoughts in general, and you can language about visual inputs, about motor cortex. You can talk about basically everything. And so it's intricately connected to knowledge itself. And so I think language is super fascinating. And what I meant with saying that language modeling, trying to just predict the next word, is almost AI complete, is that in order to be able to correctly predict the next word, sometimes you have to build a whole 3D model of the world, right? Like if I say, oh, how do I walk from downtown Menlo Park to Stanford University? You kind of have to know the 3D model of the world, and then I can try to describe it in natural language. And so to me, that kind of is just one example of how interesting and hard language modeling is in the limit, as you really try to lower perplexities or like increase probabilities for correctly predicting the next word.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. In the limit, I guess right now GPT-3 can add 3-digit numbers without even being trained specifically to do that, but it would still struggle on really challenging question. I guess you can like put anything in a question in English and try to get a language model to answer it. Yeah. Cool. So maybe back a bit more to the main thread of this session. I'm really interested in the 3 pillars you mentioned for U.com: privacy, agency, and summarization. So I have a couple follow-up questions for each one. What do you think is the importance of, so you mentioned privacy at U.com, you can turn it on or off, but people are
so it's
that
always
there's
on
this
by default, but you can go into an almost paranoid private mode where nothing is stored, nothing gets shared. So if you want the convenience, for instance, of saying best Thai restaurants near me, it just can't give you results because no one will know where you are, and you can't have any preferences. And then you can switch, and then even in the personalized mode, we're not sharing your data. We're not doing targeted advertisement. We're not following you around the internet with pixels and so on. But we store your query so that we know how to personalize your experience, and you can set your preferences to say, I want to see more of Reddit. I want to see more of Stack Overflow, and I don't want to see maybe Twitter or something else.
Mm-hmm. And can you add like, it's okay for you to know my location so that you can get Thai restaurants, but not like save my queries or something?
That's right.
Mm-hmm. I see. Do you see users opting to be more private at the expense of the convenience, or is it more they want more convenience?
Our private search is so private, we actually don't know if a user is in it or not, which is a little tricky. Yeah, we maybe need to have at least a global counter of seeing more, like if it's used and how much it's used. But yeah, we don't know what people are doing in private mode and how many are in there, because nothing gets logged. So we may eventually have a global counter of like this many anonymized like queries were made in private mode, and we still don't know what the queries are. We still don't store anything, but we at least have one number that counts. So we know, but right now nothing. We don't even know like how many queries are being made in that mode.
Mm-hmm. Got it. And actually, I'm trying to keep an eye on chat too. I'm sure we'll have time closer to the end to get to the chats. But one person said, is the private mode of U.com, can you compare that to the private mode of DuckDuckGo?
Yeah, happy to. In fact, I see Ishan already just posted that really well. You think I can share my screen, or is that not?
I think so.
Oh, nice. Okay. So this is kind of easier to see. So we actually have a full privacy feature comparison. So here you have Google, and then you have our personalized mode, you have DuckDuckGo, and then you have our private mode. And so in private, so for instance, privacy is kind of multidimensional, and there are lots of different ways and people conceptualize it differently. So it's very important to be very concrete and also kind of combine privacy with data transparency. So here, there's one dimension, which is storing your search. Google stores your search, our personalized mode stores your search. DuckDuckGo actually stores all the searches. So if you add your name with something else in your query, DuckDuckGo will store it. It's not connected to your IP address, but it will still get stored. So in private mode, we don't even do that. And then, collecting feedback to improve the product. Those three search engines do it. In private mode, again, we don't. Which also means that our private mode will be harder to learn and get better. And so again, even some privacy-focused search engines do that. Your IP location is not stored, recovered, or shared with search and ad partners. Again, it will struggle with convenience, but if you want to just quickly go into mode and just have no one know where you are or what you want to do or some funky skin rash you may have or whatever it is, then you can go into private mode and you don't do that. And then there are some things that we share, like the platform doesn't know who you are, and there's no way to tie your searches together. So knowing that, oh, you made this query and then you made this other query, so that probably that means you weren't happy with the first query, and maybe the ranker needs to improve. This is something we do in personalized mode and we don't do in private mode. And this is why we now have better and better results for things that people don't find is very well ranked on other search companies. And so on. We don't do targeted ads. We don't follow you around third-party sites on the internet and things like that. And there are some things that most reasonable search engines will do, which is encrypt your requests so people can't spy on you and your Wi-Fi traffic and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Got it. All right, so now maybe we can switch to another pillar. I'm interested in the third one, summarization.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to ask about, so natural language models are, it seems like they're notorious for like misinformation or even bias when like creating their own texts. I guess more in text generation, but maybe this is also related to summarization as well.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any thoughts on this, or is Vue.com working particularly on these questions?
Yeah, good question. So I think there's different ways. When I started working on summarization as a researcher, I used to always think long text in, short text out, and that's like how you X and Y, inputs, outputs, supervised kind of models. And at some point you realize that that's not really a well-defined problem. One, it's under constraint because what is a good summary for one person who's been reading about a subject for years and knows all the details and just sees a new paper and wants to get a summary of it, is a very different kind of perfect summary to what a novice who doesn't know anything about maybe DNA or protein generation, and then you throw out all these terms, and maybe the summary needs to almost be longer or include some definitions to even understand what the new research paper is about, things like that. So summaries are personalized, and it's very hard and currently not done in the research world to actually create personalized summaries. So that's one problem. The other one is that when we think about a summary for best Thai restaurant near me, for instance, you don't want a large text that tells you like, here are a bunch of restaurant descriptions and things like that. What you instead would want is to see a list, and maybe I'll share it here really quickly again. Best Thai restaurant near me. It's like, well, this is kind of what you want to see. You want to see star ratings, reviews, and stuff like that. I think it's even harder. Like, how do you summarize Foo Fighters, right? It's like, well, there's some factual things, some quick facts, some web results, but also social dimensions, like what are people saying about them on Reddit? Maybe you want to play their music. Maybe you want to play their songs. Maybe you want to hear what they have to say on Twitter. And so there are all these different dimensions. And then language models are really tricky because you don't really, you can't really rely on the veracity, on the truthfulness of language models. So you can't really let them just go run wild and give you an output for the most part, especially when it comes to natural language. But there are some examples of things that where we have actually incorporated them directly in the search results. And one of them is code completion. So if I search for something on Vue.com like hashtag or pound send SMS and Twilio, and in the middle of some hackathon, I want to implement something quickly, I can go to the standard web results and see quickly if maybe someone already has had that question and answered it, and there's a code snippet I can quickly copy and paste right here. But if there is no such site and no such answer, then we actually have an AI that might generate the answer for you with a language model trained on code, similar to GitHub Copilot, and might actually write the entirety of the function for you. And I think that kind of summarization and language modeling application is something that is really powerful and basically helps. It's another way to think about summarization, right? It's a summary of all the codes that's been written. Now you can have control and guidance over what you would want it to generate.
Got it. So yeah, summarization is much more complex than just compressing the text, but really it can be personalized, or it can yeah, it's pretty interesting. So maybe the goal of summarization in the future is like give it tons of parameters, like how much of an expert are you, or like how many paragraphs you want the output to be. Yeah, it looks like Vue.com's making great progress towards that. And yeah, do you have any? So does Vue.com struggle with like misinformation or like, like language models often when they're asked to generate prose, they might just give factually incorrect answers.
Yeah, so that's why it's tough to, I don't think language models are ready yet to just be giving you the actual answers and just generate them. You know, there are still probabilistic models. You sample from them, like you saw the code generation. There are 3 different samples from the model for one coding question. And some of them look very useful and others didn't look that great. And I was like, sloppy code, didn't look very clean, didn't look like it would even compile. And so when it comes to natural language and real factual answers, I think there's still more work that needs to get done for language models to generate truthful content and not just be sort of randomly, statistically sampling from a distribution without sort of understanding second order effects and logic and truthfulness and adherence to some facts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely seems like an interesting question, especially to do in an unsupervised way. But I'm sure there will be a lot more innovation in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, and in many ways, what I think will make sense for us also is we're very inspired by Web3 and allowing people to kind of contribute both in financial upsides in the future, but also in sort of collections and building out what they think might make sense and give feedback to the systems, telling them, oh, I want to see more of that preferred source or less of that source. And that's kind of an important part of summarization, to make sure that people actually have some control over those summaries to make sure they work for them.
Got it. So it almost like needs to be a semi-supervised problem inherently.
That's right.
Nice. So that leads to another more broad question I had. I guess we've already touched on this throughout this talk, but what do you think are like the really big future questions to tackle in search, like long-term horizon? What are the most interesting innovations that you can think of?
So I think in general, at a very, like when you zoom out and you think about sort of mega trends or where the zeitgeist is headed, I think there is more and more information out there. And people struggle with being able to stay on top of it all. So summarization is probably the biggest part of it. But then we also don't want to end with just a pure search engine, but help it almost make it a do engine. And you see the code snippets and a little copy and paste button right next to them. That is kind of the first instantiation of something that would allow users to execute on their intent that they basically communicated through the query. And you see this already right now, in that 65% of all Google searches are 0 clicks, meaning they don't leave the Google ecosystem. You stay on YouTube, you go to Google Maps, Google Shopping. People also ask, and you kind of Tarzan your way through, and the rest of the internet's kind of left out. And companies don't have any control anymore, but users are getting more and more used to doing what they want on that first page of the internet. And so we think that you need to open up that first page of the internet and make it clean, private, with agency, but allow companies to participate there. So I think this kind of open, building a more open platform is something I'm really excited about. Now, no one wants to build on top of an open platform if it's not super stable, super fast, and has users. So we're focused on that, but very excited next couple of months to open this up and let more people participate on that first page of the internet.
Wow, yeah, that's quite a scary statistic. 65% of queries don't leave Google.
Yeah, when you combine that with the entire economy is moving online, and you combine that with the privacy invasion, and you combine that with like not having any agency of what you see there, I think it's clear that we need more alternatives.
Definitely. All right, maybe I can look in the chat a little bit more as we're getting closer to the end. I see a few more questions specifically about U.com. One says, how does U.com make money?
Yeah, the answer is right now we're not making money, but we have several ideas. So in private mode, we may need to turn on private ads similar to DuckDuckGo, just because there's nothing else that you really can do because you know nothing else about the user and we don't want to ask anything from them. But when you're in personalized mode, there are actually a lot of options, and I'm kind of surprised that how little creativity there has been in exploring different ways that are aligned with privacy, but can still make money. We're still very early in those explorations, and it'd be kind of silly to tell our competitors all the good ideas before we've made some progress on them. But you know, we commit to never doing.
Oh, my fault. What was that?
I think Peter, you're still you're not muted. Thanks, Peter. Where were we? Yeah, so it would kind of not make sense to tell our competition all the ideas for next year that we're planning on implementing, but we do commit to never forcing privacy invading targeted ads on people, and doing things that are aligned with our values of trust, facts, and kindness.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. One other person asks about can summarization also be seen as a reinforcement learning approach? And they say with rewards fed from the viewer's point of view on like how good. Oh yeah, I guess you sort of already did answer that.
A little bit, yeah. So RL and multi-arm bandits and so on are definitely technologies that are very helpful and kind of tell you also. And sometimes it's hard, right? Sometimes you don't know if someone read something, felt like that was a great first step, and now I want to read another type of source that is deeper in the subject, versus they read it, didn't find it useful, and then wanted to switch to another subject. But there again, I think instead of trying to do all of that implicitly, we allow users to give more feedback. Already now you can kind of say, I want this app to be ranked higher or lower. I want to have general global ranking preferences that I can set, and that kind of informs it. So I think it'll be good. AI is amazing and I love it, and it can automate lots of things, but there needs to be some human control that is infused into these AI systems to make sure they stay aligned with what users want. Yeah, I see the question about monthly subscription. I think monthly subscriptions for certain sets of features are not crazy to think about. I think it's the second common way for consumer companies to monetize. I think it's slightly more creative than ads, but still not as creative as some of the ideas that we have and want to introduce.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I have another question. So you talked before about how you can use the same sort of language models also to like create novel proteins, and that worked really well. And we've also talked about how the same language models also do code generation. So it seems like there are these really interesting, surprising applications that sort of come out of work on language models. Do you have any others you think are really interesting or really intriguing future consequences of research in language modeling?
I guess in general for AI, I have a bunch of other ones that I think are exciting.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe just for language modeling, I do think we can get better and better at helping people summarize content. And I think that is really the big problem of our time, right? Like, what information do you want to trust? Which sources do you want summarized? And then helping you deal with this influx and flood of information. I think other than protein sequences, which I think will change all of medicine in the next decade or two, those are sort of the biggest sequences that matter. I think some of the underlying technology we'll see in self-driving cars and are seeing already in Tesla and so on, transformers that came out of language modeling. I think another area that has seen surprising little impact of AI until now is economics. And one of the last papers back at Salesforce that we're working on is the Ai Economist, which is basically a massively large simulation based on a two-level reinforcement learning model, where you have an AI economist that sets taxes and subsidies and other things, And then you have a lot of AI agents that are just trying to maximize their own utility, their own, how much money they make, how many resources they collect. And so you can kind of show how an AI that can take millions and millions of years of taxation can come up with a better way to optimize certain things like equality or productivity of the overall economy. And the field of economics, similar to the field of linguistics, is not very open to those ideas. We had some very traditional sociologists and economists who rejected that paper without any review from science, which is kind of surprising. And I understand it. They're just like, they don't want their field to change. And I think that that kind of line of reasoning will be massively impactful for those countries that mostly want to optimize with less identity politics and more just like, let's just try to optimize these metrics. And my hope is that in the future, when politicians say, I want to help the middle class and here's how I'm going to do it, you run their suggestions through millions of years of simulation and you compare that to what an AI might recommend. And hopefully you'll understand why they would differ and what they would actually achieve. And so, for that to work, the simulations need to get more and more realistic. And of course, they need to be completely open source. So no one can kind of fiddle with the simulation, say, oh, the simulation said we should do X, Y, Z, and then you can't really verify it. But it's, I think, a really powerful idea. And when you look at economics, you realize, man, they're mostly just using like linear regression, logistic regression type models. And yes, all models are wrong, but the models they're using are definitely wrong. Like they're so much more wrong than any simulation in RL system that we've already come up with, that it's kind of surprising how much we still rely on these very linear models in economics. But yeah, anyway, that kind of line of research, I think, is going to be super powerful.
So it's basically like applying machine learning techniques to economics to use more complex models that can do more. So I wonder if this so it's what I've heard of this work, the AI Economist, but I haven't read it in detail yet. So is it both like a proof of concept that shows that AI can really be used to make better policies, and also sort of like a toolkit that policymakers can use to like verify their decisions?
That's right. Yeah. And it's a really tough RL problem because in almost all of AI, we usually have one fixed objective function, and then we just optimize everything based on that. And multitask learning has that problem, NLP, of changing objective functions. And this one in particular has a similar kind of problem that whenever the AI economist says, oh, you used to get 1,000 coins for collecting wood or stone or building a house, now you only get 900. That means that the objective function of each of the RL agents has now changed, and they need to adapt to that. And so there's a delay, and basically you keep changing the goalpost of all the little RL agents inside the simulation, which makes it an incredibly hard optimization problem.
Yeah, it makes sense. All right, I see a few more questions popped up during that last during the AI and economics question. Let me see. Actually, one question before that, someone asked about, I think this was back in the when we were talking about summarization, they asked about primary versus secondary sources. So do you see any virtue in like trying to only use primary sources versus secondary?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one problem with having a one-dimensional list in your search results is that it's really hard to zoom in to one source and learn more about it directly. So let's say Quora has a bunch of really good answers and questions to something that you're looking for. You can only see one or two, and then it would kind of be weird to drown out everything else in a one-dimensional list. But once you move to a two-dimensional interface, where you can easily zoom in more and more to the right, but then also skip to the next kind of source directly, that to me is how you can enable people to have as much access to information for a primary source, and then easily still jump to a secondary and see opinions about it, or see what people are saying about it, or what news agencies write about it. And so I think they're both important. I think it's helpful to see, and I wish more people would look at primary information, but the truth is they're not often summarized well enough, and you need to have better summarization for those primary sources that is as unbiased as possible. And then so often people fall back to a more convenient and faster way to digest it, and just get the opinions often in secondary sources. And it is up to us to try to find the least sort of biased information sources too, which is why we looked at the All Sides map of the US media ecosystem and tried to mostly encourage sources that are centrist or center left, center right, and not way out on the fringes, to get you sucked into attention loops. And great question. Thanks, Terrence.
Yeah. All right, maybe one or two more questions. One from the AI Economist. They say, while economists do a lot of forecasting, I have not seen many deep learning models beat classical models like ARIMA. I guess actually that only applies to forecasting, not like the more complex econ problems. But do you have any thoughts on that?
My hunch is just not enough people have worked on AI and economics. And when I was thinking a couple of years ago, like how could I maximize the impact of AI? And I've seen bigger and bigger models, and I loved all the progress in language models, for instance. But so many people are now working on language models that I've always thought about, okay, what can I do to have a lot of impact? And when I feel like, oh, I have this idea, and then 3 months later, I see a bunch of other people already doing it, I'm like, well, glad I didn't also waste my time, because it's already been sort of in the ether and in the idea space of things that people come up with themselves. So then I try to zoom out and think about things that no one is working on, and or not enough people are working on, even though it could be very impactful. And so I think AI and economics is in that space right now. You don't really see massive competitions like we see with ImageNet or with sentiment analysis, where we have really great data sets and people can just have really convenient access to comparing their algorithms. I think we need to see more of that in economics.
Got it. So yeah, that's another interesting question that might not be oversaturated yet. All right, I think we're out of time now. So thank you very much, Richard, once again for joining us. It was a very nice conversation.